"I don't want you staying here out of pity," the cowboy said, as rain hammered the barn roof. "I want you beside me when this place finally feels like home." Smoke curled through the burning stable as Savannah wrapped Eli inside her coat and stumbled through the heat, her boots sliding across wet straw while horses screamed behind her. Outside, Cole's voice tore through the storm, desperate enough to shake her to the bone. Then she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before, and it made her stop cold in the middle of the fire. If stories like this still mean something to your heart, come sit by the fire with us tonight. The heat sat heavy over Red Canyon that September afternoon, pressing dust against the windows of the little church on Main Street. Horses stamped outside near the hitching rail. Somewhere down the road, a blacksmith hammered iron in slow, dull strikes that carried through town like a clock no one could stop. Inside the church, every fan in every hand moved at the same tired pace. Savannah Reed stood beside the altar in a plain, cream-colored dress. May Holloway had altered 2 nights earlier by lantern light. The sleeves fit too tightly at the wrists. The hem brushed the tops of her worn brown boots hidden beneath the fabric. Her hands stayed folded low against her stomach, fingers still except for the smallest tremor in her thumb. She kept her eyes forward, not on the preacher, not on the people whispering behind folded programs, and not on the man beside her. Cole Whitaker stood tall near the pulpit, broad shoulders stiff beneath a dark coat he looked uncomfortable wearing. A streak of dust still marked one sleeve from the cattle yard. He had likely forgotten it was there. Pastor Wilkins cleared his throat and continued reading from the Bible, though even he sounded weary beneath the heat. "Marriage asks for patience," the old man said softly, "and kindness in difficult seasons." A baby cried somewhere near the back pews. No one moved. Everyone in Red Canyon knew why this wedding was happening. Silas Granger sat near the front beside Savannah's father, Jasper Reed. Silas wore a gray suit despite the heat and held a silver pocket watch against one knee. He watched the ceremony the way a banker watched numbers being counted. Business, nothing more. Jasper smelled of whiskey even from 2 pews away. His suspenders hung crooked over his shirt, and sweat darkened the collar around his neck. He did not once look at his daughter. Savannah noticed that more than anything else. 3 days earlier she had found the debt papers spread across the kitchen table, beside an empty bottle, and 2 cigars burned down to ash. $2,700. Her father could never pay it. Silas had made certain of that. The preacher reached the vows. Cole spoke first. His voice was low and rough from years breathing cold Wyoming mornings. "I do." Simple, flat, like signing for feed delivery. When it was Savannah's turn, the church seemed smaller somehow. Hotter. She heard somebody cough. A chair creaked. Outside, wind pushed dust along the church steps. "I do," she said quietly. Pastor Wilkins nodded once. His eyes lingered on her face, as if he wanted to say something kinder than Scripture allowed. Then came the silence everyone had been waiting for. "You may kiss the bride." Cole hesitated, just long enough for the whole church to notice. Then he leaned down, brushed his lips against Savannah's for barely a second, and stepped back again. Not cruel, not tender either, just obligation. A murmur moved through the pews. Savannah stared ahead, refusing to let her face change. Near the back, one woman whispered too loudly, "Lord, help that poor girl." Another answered, "Poor him too." Silas Granger smiled without warmth. The church bell rang after the ceremony ended, but the sound felt hollow drifting over the town. Outside, sunlight struck hard across the dirt road. Men gathered near the saloon porch, pretending not to stare. Women lingered beside wagons, lowering their voices when Savannah passed. Cole helped her into the wagon without touching more than her elbow. His son sat waiting near the front bench. Eli Whitaker, 8 years old, thin shoulders, brown hair falling into quiet eyes too old for a child. He looked at Savannah carefully. Not mean, just uncertain. Cole climbed up beside him and took the reins. The wagon rolled out of town slowly, wheels crunching over dry gravel. For nearly 20 minutes, nobody spoke. Red Canyon disappeared behind them. Open prairie stretched wide beneath the fading afternoon sun. Fence posts cut long shadows across the grasslands. Far west, the Wind River Mountains rose blue against the sky. Eli finally looked up at his father. "Is she staying forever?" Cole tightened the reins once. The leather creaked in his hand. But he never answered. Savannah lowered her eyes toward her lap. That hurt more than she expected. By sundown, they stopped briefly near Miller's Crossing to water the horses. Cole walked toward the trough with Eli while Savannah remained near the wagon beneath a cottonwood tree. That was when she heard them. Jasper Reed and Silas Granger stood beside the general store porch 20 feet away, speaking low enough they thought no one else could hear. Silas lit a cigar. Jasper laughed dryly. "Well," Jasper muttered, "once the debt is gone, she's your problem now." Silas exhaled smoke slowly. "Whitaker bought himself peace. Let's see how long it lasts." Savannah stood perfectly still. The words landed without surprise. "Only wait." A screen door slapped shut nearby. Somebody carried sacks of flour across the street. Life kept moving as though nothing had happened. Cole returned a few moments later, holding Eli's shoulder gently. Savannah climbed back into the wagon without a word. The sun was gone by the time they reached the ranch. Whitaker Ranch sat alone beneath the darkening Wyoming sky, surrounded by split-rail fencing and rolling pastureland silvered by moonlight. A lantern burned near the barn doors. Wind rattled loose tin somewhere above the stable roof. Savannah stepped down from the wagon slowly. The house was larger than she expected, though worn from weather and hard winters. One porch step sagged near the middle. Eli disappeared inside first. Cole unloaded her single suitcase from the wagon bed. As he lifted it, something shifted inside with a dull metal sound. His eyes narrowed slightly. Before Savannah could stop him, the suitcase tipped sideways just enough for the edge of a small revolver to show beneath folded dresses. Cole looked at the gun, then at her. Savannah held his gaze for the first time all day. Neither spoke. After a moment, he closed the suitcase again and handed it back carefully. "Your room's down the hall," he said quietly. Nothing else. Inside, the ranch house smelled faintly of cedar smoke, coffee grounds, and old pine floors. A clock ticked somewhere in the kitchen. Savannah carried her suitcase into the small bedroom at the end of the hall. One narrow bed, a wash basin, thin curtains moving softly in the night breeze. She stood alone in the middle of the room for a long moment. Then she locked the door, dragged a wooden chair beneath the knob, and finally sat on the edge of the bed with both hands trembling in her lap. Outside in the hallway, Cole Whitaker stopped in front of the closed door. The lamp beside him burned low. He looked at the chair's shadow beneath the doorway and understood exactly why it was there. His jaw tightened once. Then quietly, without knocking, he walked away into the darkness of the house. Morning came cold across the Wyoming plains. Savannah woke before sunrise to the sound of wind rubbing against the outside walls and the slow creak of the ranch sign swinging near the gate. For a few seconds she forgot where she was. Then she saw the unfamiliar ceiling above her and the chair still wedged beneath the doorknob. The room smelled faintly of pine wood and dust. She sat up slowly and listened. A pot lid rattled somewhere in the kitchen. Boots crossed the porch outside. A horse snorted near the barn. Life already moving. Savannah removed the chair from the door, but kept the revolver tucked beneath her folded shawl before stepping into the hallway. Cole stood at the stove with his back turned, pouring coffee into a chipped white cup. Steam rose around his shoulders. He had already changed into work clothes. Denim shirt, brown vest, mud on the edge of one boot. Eli sat at the table staring into a bowl of oats without eating. No one spoke at first. Savannah moved quietly toward the cupboard, found another cup, and poured coffee for herself. The silence felt thick enough to touch. Cole finally cleared his throat. "There's fresh water out back if you need it." She nodded once. That was all. Outside, dawn spread pale gold across the prairie. Frost clung to the fence rails even though autumn had barely settled in. Beyond the pasture, the Wind River Mountains stood dark against the brightening sky. Savannah rolled up her sleeves and began working, because work was easier than standing still. She swept the porch, fed the chickens, shook dust from the curtains. By noon, she had already folded laundry, left untouched for days, and scrubbed dried mud from the kitchen floorboards. The house carried traces of another woman everywhere. A blue ribbon hanging from a nail near the washroom. A cracked teacup carefully glued together. A faded quilt folded over the parlor chair. Savannah noticed all of it without asking questions. Cole spent most days outside with the cattle hands repairing fence lines before winter. He returned after sundown smelling of cold air, horse sweat, and sawdust from the barn. Each evening followed the same rhythm. Savannah cooked. Eli ate quietly. Cole kept his eyes on his plate. Then everyone disappeared into separate rooms before the fire burned low. No laughter, no comfort. Only the clink of forks and the whistle of prairie wind through the cracks. 3 weeks passed that way. One rainy afternoon, Savannah found Cole's coat thrown across the kitchen chair, dripping water onto the floorboards. She lifted it carefully and hung it beside the stove. The next morning, his boots sat in the middle of the hallway, caked in manure and dirt from the north pasture. She moved them outside without a word. At first, she said nothing. Then small things began slipping out. Wet coats sour the room. Boots don't belong near clean floors. The coffee tin should stay sealed. Her voice never rose. But Cole heard the sharpness beneath it. He answered with silence or short nods, while something stubborn slowly tightened inside him. No one had corrected him in years, not since Clara died. One evening, near the end of October, Cole stopped at Harper's saloon on his way back from town. Snow clouds had started gathering over the mountains, and most of the ranch hands crowded inside around the stove, drinking cheap whiskey from cloudy glasses. Cole barely finished half a drink before somebody laughed near the poker table. "Bought yourself a wife same way men buy cattle," another cowboy snorted. "Least cattle complain less." The room chuckled low. Cole set down his glass harder than he meant to. He left without finishing the whiskey. By the time he reached home, darkness had swallowed the ranch whole. Rain tapped steady against the roof. Savannah stood near the stove stirring stew, while Eli copied spelling words beside the lamp. Cole came in carrying cold air with him. His coat landed across a chair. Mud dropped from his boots onto the clean floor. Savannah looked over once, then back to the pot. "The hooks are by the door," she said quietly. Cole removed his gloves without answering. "And the boots should stay outside till they dry." Still silence. Something in Savannah finally frayed. "I clean this house every day, Mr. Whitaker. I'd appreciate not having to do it twice." The words were calm. That somehow made them cut deeper. Cole slammed his whiskey glass onto the table hard enough to rattle the spoons. Enough. The room froze. Eli flinched so sharply his pencil rolled off the table. Rain hammered harder against the windows. Savannah stood perfectly still beside the stove. Her face emptied of expression, little by little, until it became unreadable. Cole immediately regretted it, but pride held his mouth shut. Eli pushed back his chair and disappeared down the hallway without a sound. Savannah ladled stew into bowls with slow, careful movements. She set one before Cole without looking at him. Neither touched their food for a long while. That night she washed dishes alone after everyone else went to bed. Cole sat on the porch steps in the dark, staring across the pasture while rain drifted silver through lantern light. He heard the bedroom door close softly down the hall, later, then silence again. Near midnight, after the stove had burned low, Cole woke to the sound, soft at first, then clearer. Someone crying. He sat upright immediately. The sound came from Savannah's room, not loud, not dramatic. The kind of crying someone tried hard to swallow before another breath escaped anyway. Cole crossed the hallway slowly and stopped outside her door. The lantern beside him flickered weakly. Inside the room, the crying quieted for a moment, then returned again, smaller this time. Cole lifted his hand once toward the door, but he never knocked. Instead, he stood there in silence until the oil lamp beside him finally burned out. Morning arrived gray and bitter cold. Savannah came into the kitchen wearing the same calm expression she always wore. No trace remained from the night before. She poured coffee, started biscuits, fed Eli before sunrise. Cole watched her from across the table. Then, without a word, he bent down beside the door, picked up a scraper, and carefully cleaned every bit of dried mud from his boots before stepping inside the house. Savannah noticed. Her hands paused for half a second on the coffee pot, but she said nothing at all. November settled hard over Wyoming after that. The mornings turned white with frost. Water buckets froze thin at the edges before sunrise. Wind came sweeping down from the Wind River Mountains sharp enough to sting a man's lungs. Life at the ranch kept moving in its quiet rhythm. Savannah baked bread every Thursday because flour wagons came through Red Canyon on Fridays. Cole split wood before daylight and stacked it beneath the porch awning in neat rows now, instead of leaving it scattered beside the barn. Eli still spoke little, but sometimes Savannah caught him watching her while she worked, curious in the careful way of lonely children. Small things changed first. One evening, she found her sewing basket moved closer to the lamp so the light would fall better across the thread. Another morning, Cole discovered his scarf drying beside the stove after returning soaked from sleet the night before. No words attached to either kindness, only noticing. That Sunday, the three of them rode into town together for supplies. Snow clouds hung low over Red Canyon, turning the whole place gray and dim. Men gathered outside Harper's saloon, rubbing gloved hands together against the cold, while wagon wheels cracked frozen mud along Main Street. Savannah stayed inside Miller's general store, measuring coffee beans into paper sacks while Cole loaded feed outside. Eli wandered farther than he should have. Near the barber shop, two older boys stood kicking at snow piled beside the boardwalk. One of them looked toward the Whitaker wagon and laughed. "Your daddy married her because nobody else wanted her." The second boy snickered. "Probably paid for her same way folks buy mules." Eli's face went red clear to his ears. He shoved one boy hard enough to knock him sideways into the snow before running down the alley behind the mercantile. Cole found him 10 minutes later sitting behind the feed shed with fists clenched and tears frozen against his cheeks. Neither spoke much on the ride home. But that night Eli barely touched his supper. Wind screamed across the plains after dark. Snow battered the windows, hard enough to shake the glass. By midnight, the entire ranch disappeared beneath white drifts and blowing ice. Savannah woke sometime after 1 in the morning. At first, she thought the storm itself had pulled her awake. Then she realized the house felt wrong, too quiet. She reached for the lamp beside the bed and opened her door. Cole already stood in the hallway pulling on his coat. The boys gone. Everything inside the house seemed to stop moving for one terrible second. Cole grabbed the lantern from the wall hook and headed toward the front door. But Savannah was already reaching for her boots. "You stay here," he snapped. She ignored him completely. Outside, the storm hit like a wall. Snow whipped sideways across the yard. The barn roof groaned beneath the wind. Visibility stretched no farther than the fence posts. "Ellie!" Cole shouted into the dark. Nothing answered except the storm. Savannah lifted the lantern low toward the ground. Near the chicken coop, she spotted faint tracks already half covered by fresh snow. small boots, heading north. He went this way. Cole turned immediately. The two of them pushed forward through waist-deep drifts, wind tearing at their coats. Snow crusted Savannah's eyelashes and froze against the scarf around her mouth. Her fingers burned from cold even through wool gloves. The tracks led toward Miller's Ridge, toward the ravine. Cole's voice broke once calling Eli's name. Savannah had never heard fear sound like that in a grown man. By the time they reached the ridge, the storm had become almost impossible to stand against. The lantern flickered violently in the wind. Then Savannah heard it, a weak cry somewhere below. She dropped to her knees near the edge of the ravine. "Ellie," another cry answered. Faint, frightened. Cole slid halfway down the snowy embankment while Savannah anchored herself against Pine's stump and held the lantern high. Eli had fallen into a narrow hollow between rocks, where snow had drifted around him almost to his chest. The boy was shivering so hard his teeth rattled. Cole pulled him free and wrapped him tight in his own coat. But halfway back up the ridge, Eli suddenly stopped moving. Savannah's heart nearly quit. "Cole, he's breathing, barely." The wind had turned vicious now. There was no chance of making it back quickly. Savannah dropped into the snow beside Eli and pulled the wool blanket around all three of them, pressing the boy tight against her chest beneath her coat. "Keep talking to him," she whispered. Cole held the lantern close while snow piled against their backs. "You hear me, son?" His voice shook rough in the dark. "Stay awake now." Eli's frozen fingers clutched weakly at Savannah's sleeve. Hours later, just before dawn, they finally reached the ranch. Old Doc Mercer arrived near sunrise, wrapped in buffalo fur and cursing the weather the entire way from town. "Storm damn near killed my horse getting here," he muttered while checking Eli's breathing beside the stove. The boy would recover. Savannah was another matter. By afternoon, fever had already settled deep into her chest. For 3 straight days she drifted in and out of restless sleep while wind rattled the house and snow buried the pasture fences outside. Cole barely left her bedside. He changed cool cloths against her forehead, fed wood into the stove every hour, held coffee cups forgotten and cold in his hands while watching her breathe. Eli refused to sleep anywhere except the chair beside her bed. Late the second night, Savannah began murmuring through the fever, words broken and soft. "Mama, please." Cole leaned closer. "Savannah," her face tightened with pain somewhere far away. "Don't leave me behind." The words hit harder than the storm ever had. Cole sat very still after that, looking at her small hand lying weak against the blanket, understanding something for the first time. She knew loneliness too. Maybe better than he ever had. The fever finally broke near dawn on the 4th day. Snowlight spilled pale through the bedroom curtains. The stove crackled low in the next room. Savannah opened her eyes slowly. Everything felt heavy. Then she noticed the small, warm weight against her arm. Eli had fallen asleep beside the bed, still holding tightly to her hand, like letting go might somehow lose her again. Across the room, Cole sat near the window with his hat resting forgotten in his lap. And when Savannah looked at him, truly looked this time, his eyes did not turn away. Winter loosened slowly after that. Snow still covered the far hills, but water began dripping from the ranch roof at noon. The hard ice along the horse trough softened under the sun. Mud returned to the roads leading into Red Canyon, deep enough to trap wagon wheels if a driver wasn't careful. Inside the Whitaker house, something softer had begun thawing too. Not all at once, little things. Eli started lingering in the kitchen after supper, instead of rushing straight to his room. Some evenings Savannah found him beside the stove while she kneaded biscuit dough, quietly shaping scraps into crooked animals with his small hands dusted white with flour. Cole came home earlier now, sometimes before sunset. One evening, Savannah stepped onto the porch, carrying folded laundry, and stopped short when she saw him crouched beside her rocking chair, with a hammer in hand. The old chair had leaned sideways for months because one leg kept splitting near the bottom. Cole tightened the final nail and tested it carefully before standing. "There," he muttered, "should hold now." Savannah looked at the chair, then at him. "Thank you." The words came softly, almost unfamiliar. Cole rubbed the back of his neck once, like the gratitude embarrassed him, more than hard labor ever could. Another night rain moved across the plains steady and slow, tapping against the porch roof, while lantern light flickered warm inside the house. Eli had fallen asleep in the parlor, with a book open across his chest. Savannah sat near the stove mending one of Cole's work shirts. The elbows had nearly worn through from fence repairs. Cole paused halfway through pouring coffee when he noticed the thread in her hands. Blue, not plain brown like most ranch stitching. Blue because she had once heard Eli mention it was his father's favorite color. He watched her quietly for a moment before sitting across from her at the table. Outside, thunder rolled low beyond the mountains. Inside, neither spoke, but the silence no longer felt empty. By early April, the first green shoots pushed through the pasture land. Cattle wandered farther from the barn again. Meadowlarks returned to the fence posts, every morning singing sharp against the wind. Then Silas Granger came back. His carriage rolled through the ranch gate just after noon, while Cole repaired harness straps near the stable. Savannah recognized the black horses first. Her stomach tightened immediately. Silas stepped down wearing polished boots untouched by mud. A silver watch chain glinted across his vest. He carried papers tucked neatly beneath one arm. "Whitaker," he called calmly. "We need to discuss business." Cole's face hardened before the man even reached the porch. The three of them stood inside the kitchen afterward while rain clouds gathered dark outside the windows. Silas spread the papers across the table with slow, careful fingers. Loan extensions, interest totals, feed credit. He smiled thinly. "You're running out of time." Cole barely glanced down. "I'll pay. Before summer?" Silas asked. "That ranch won't survive another poor season." Savannah stood near the stove, holding still as stone. Then Silas looked toward her. "Course," he said lightly. "Things might turned out simpler had the girl come to me first." The room changed instantly. Cole stepped forward so fast. His chair slammed backward against the floorboards. "Watch your mouth." Silas raised both hands calmly, though satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "Easy now. I'm only speaking truth." Savannah felt cold all over. She remembered too clearly the nights her father drank away, borrowed money, while Silas sat nearby watching her across the kitchen table like a man pricing livestock. Cole moved closer until the two men stood nearly chest to chest. "You leave her out of this." Silas studied him a long moment, then slowly gathered the papers back into his leather case. "Pay before July," he said quietly, "or the ranch belongs to me." The front door slammed behind him moments later. Rain began falling hard against the roof. Cole stood with both hands braced against the table, breathing rough through his nose. Savannah stared at the floorboards. That night she packed quietly after everyone fell asleep. Not much, a change of clothes, her mother's old Bible, the small revolver wrapped in cloth. She had nearly reached the barn when Cole's voice stopped her from the doorway. "Where are you going?" Rain hammered the stable roof above them. Horses shifted softly in their stalls nearby. Savannah didn't turn around immediately. "If I leave," she whispered, "maybe he'll stop coming after this place." Cole stepped closer through the dim lantern light. "He's not chasing the ranch. He's chasing me." Her voice cracked on the last word despite herself. For a long moment neither moved. Then Savannah finally looked at him. "I can't be the reason your boy loses his home." Cole stared at her as if something inside him had finally broken open. Slowly he crossed the distance between them. "You listen to me." His hands closed around her shoulders carefully, firm, warm. "I don't just want you staying here." Rain thundered above them. A horse snorted softly somewhere behind the stalls. Cole's voice lowered. I want a family with you. Savannah stopped breathing for a second, not because of the words themselves, but because no one had ever spoken to her like staying mattered. Her father traded her away. Silas tried to claim her. Even life itself had always seemed ready to leave her behind. But this man stood in front of her now, looking terrified she might walk away. Tears came before she could stop them. Cole pulled her into his chest instinctively while she shook against him, hands clutching the front of his coat. I got you, he whispered roughly. You hear me? I got you. Outside the storm rolled over the prairie wild and dark. Inside the stable, Savannah slowly lifted her face. Cole brushed one thumb gently beneath her wet cheek, then finally kissed her the way a husband should have kissed his wife months ago. Slow, careful, certain. The smell of rain and hay filled the air between them. Savannah's fingers tightened against his coat, as if afraid the moment might disappear. When they finally pulled apart, neither spoke for several seconds. Only the rain spoke for them. Later that night, Savannah sat alone inside the stable after Cole returned to the house to check on Eli. A lantern burned low beside her. That was when she found the box. Old letters tied with faded ribbon tucked high on the shelf near the saddle blankets. One letter had already come loose. She should not have read it, but she did. The handwriting belonged to Cole's first wife. You work harder every year, but farther away from us too. I miss the man who used to sit beside me at supper. Savannah's chest tightened painfully. By the time Cole returned, he found her sitting silently in the straw, holding the letter with trembling fingers. She looked up slowly. Fear sat plain in her eyes now. What if loving you ends the same way? Rain tapped steady against the stable roof. Cole looked at the letter in her trembling hands, then slowly lowered himself onto the wooden crate across from her. For a long moment he said nothing. The lantern between them hissed softly, throwing gold light over the saddle leather hanging nearby. Outside, thunder rolled farther west across the plains. Cole rubbed one rough hand over his face. She died in Nebraska, he said quietly. Savannah stayed still. I was driving cattle near Ogallala when the fever got worse. His eyes lowered toward the dirt floor. By the time the telegram reached me, she was already gone. The words sounded worn thin from years of carrying them alone. I kept thinking if I worked harder. He stopped there, jaw tightening once. Truth is, I was always gone, always chasing the next season, next payment, next herd. Savannah folded the letter carefully in her lap. Cole looked toward the rain-dark doorway. She deserved more than a tired man stumbling through the door after midnight. Silence settled again, softer this time. Savannah finally spoke, and now Cole's eyes found hers. Now I know exactly what it costs to lose a family. Something in his voice made her chest ache. Not charm, not promises, just truth. The storm passed before dawn. By morning, the prairie smelled washed clean. Water dripped steadily from the roof edges while fog hung low over the pasture. Savannah woke to the sound of hammering outside. She stepped onto the porch, wrapped in her shawl, and stopped. Cole stood near the old storage shed beside the barn. Above the doorway hung a weathered wooden sign his father had nailed there years ago after the wedding. Marriage agreement. The words had faded beneath sun and winter snow, but they still sat there like something cold watching over the ranch. Cole pulled the sign down with one hard jerk. The nails screeched loose. Savannah walked slowly toward him across wet grass. Without speaking, Cole carried the board to the burn barrel beside the corral. He struck a match against his boot heel and touched flame to the dry wood. Fire climbed fast across the old letters. Cole watched it burn completely before speaking. No paper decides who stays here anymore. Savannah stared at the flames until the words collapsed into black ash. Then she stepped beside him, not close enough to touch, but close enough that he could feel her staying. Spring deepened after that. Fence posts dried beneath warm sun. Meadow grass spread green across the hills. Eli spent afternoons fishing along Willow Creek with a cane pole Cole had carved for him during winter. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Savannah laughed without catching herself afterward. Small moments filled the house now. Cole bringing wildflowers from the pasture and leaving them awkwardly in a coffee jar beside the sink. Savannah brushing dust from his shoulders before supper. Eli falling asleep against both of them during evening storms. It almost felt safe. Almost. Then came the fire. It started after midnight late in May. Savannah woke first to the smell of smoke. At first, she thought the stovepipe had clogged again. Then came Eli's scream. Cole bolted upright beside her just as orange light flashed across the bedroom wall. The barn. They ran outside barefoot into cold night air. Flames already tore through the stable roof, sparks twisting high into the black Wyoming sky. Horses kicked wildly inside their stalls. Smoke rolled thick across the yard. "Ellie," Savannah shouted. Cole turned sharply. The boy stood trapped near the hay loft window above the stable, coughing hard through smoke. For one terrible second, nobody moved. Then Savannah ran. Cole grabbed her arm. "It'll come down." But she tore free and disappeared inside the burning barn before he could stop her. Heat slammed into her instantly. Smoke clawed at her lungs. Horses screamed and battered their stall doors while burning hay drifted from the rafters. "Ellie," the boy cried somewhere above her. Savannah climbed the ladder toward the loft as sparks rained around them. Halfway up, burning wood crashed behind her onto the dirt floor. Eli threw himself into her arms the moment she reached him. She wrapped him tight inside her shawl. Then the roof groaned. Coal burst through smoke below them. "Jump!" Savannah froze. The fire roared louder. Cole climbed halfway up the ladder through smoke and flying ash until he reached them both. One arm locked around Eli, the other around Savannah. Then, together they stumbled back into the night, just as part of the roof collapsed inward behind them. The whole barn shook. Outside, neighbors from nearby ranches came racing through the dark with water buckets and blankets. Sheriff Dalton arrived before dawn, after somebody spotted horse tracks leading away from the property. By sunrise, only half the stable still stood. Cole sat on the porch steps with Eli wrapped against his chest, while Savannah coughed softly beneath May Holloway's blanket. Sheriff Dalton walked toward them, holding a blackened oil rag in one hand. "Found this near the fence line," he muttered grimly. "Barn didn't catch by accident." Cole's face went hard as stone. "Silas." Dalton nodded once. 3 days later, deputies arrested Silas Granger outside Cheyenne after discovering forged debt papers tied to several ranch foreclosures across the county. By summer, people in Red Canyon looked at the Whitaker family differently. Not with pity anymore, with respect. Months passed. Golden fields rolled beneath autumn wind. Aspen trees along the creek turned bright yellow against the mountains. One evening, Savannah stood quietly beside the porch railing, watching Cole plane smooth edges along a small wooden cradle. Eli knelt nearby painting careful blue letters across one side. The smell of pine shavings drifted through the cool air. Savannah rested one hand lightly against her stomach. Still small. Still secret enough to feel almost like a dream. Eli looked up first. "Does this mean I get to be a big brother now?" Savannah laughed before tears surprised her eyes. Cole set down the plane slowly, then crossed the porch and wrapped both arms around them together. Wind moved softly through the tall prairie grass beyond the ranch. Lantern light glowed warm through the cabin windows. And for the first time in her life, Savannah Reed no longer felt afraid of being left behind. Maybe that is the part that stays with you long after the story ends. Not the fire, not the debt papers, not even the storm that nearly took them apart. Maybe it is the quiet things. A man scraping mud from his boots before walking inside. Because someone finally mattered enough to keep the floor clean for. A little boy falling asleep while holding a woman's hand because he trusted she would still be there in the morning. A tired cowboy building a cradle on a porch, while the woman he loves watches from the doorway, like she has finally found somewhere safe to rest her heart. And maybe, if you've lived long enough, you know how rare that kind of love really is. Not loud love, not perfect love, the kind that stays, the kind that learns. The kind that comes back after mistakes and chooses the same people again the next morning. If you had been in Savannah's place, do you think you would have found the courage to trust again after being hurt for so long? Tell me down in the comments. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. And if this story gave you a little warmth tonight, I hope you'll stay a while longer. There are still more dusty roads, lonely hearts, and quiet miracles waiting out there beneath the western sky. And maybe one of those stories will feel a little like home, too.